All right, let's read Daniel chapter 7. That was a good question. NIV. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream, and visions passed through his mind as he was lying on his bed. He wrote down the substance of his dream. And Daniel said, in my vision at night I looked, and there before me were the four winds of heaven, churning up the great sea. Four great beasts, each different from the others, came up out of the sea. The first was like a lion, and it had the wings of an eagle. I watched until its wings were torn off, and it was lifted from the ground so that it stood on 2 feet like a man, and the heart of a man was given to it. And there before me was a second beast, which looked like a bear. It was raised up on one of its sides, and it had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. It was told, get up and eat your fill of flesh. After that I looked, and there before me was another beast, one that looked like a leopard, and on its back it had 4 wings like those of a bird. The beast had 4 heads, and it was given authority to rule. After that, in my vision at night, I looked, and there before me was a 4th beast, terrifying and frightening and very powerful. It had large iron teeth. It crushed and devoured its victims and trampled underfoot whatever was left. It was different from all the former beasts, and it had 10 horns. While I was thinking about the horns, there before me was another horn, a little one that came up among them, and 3 of the first horns were uprooted before it. This horn had eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth that spoke boastfully. As I looked, thrones were set in place, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was as white as snow, and the hair of his head was white like wool. His throne was flaming with fire, and its wheels were all ablaze. A river of fire was flowing, coming out from before him. Thousands upon thousands attended him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was seated, and the books were opened. Then I continued to watch because of the boastful words the horn was speaking. I kept looking until the beast was slain and its body destroyed and thrown into the blazing fire. The other beasts had been stripped of their authority, but were allowed to live for a period of time. In my vision at night I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All peoples, nations, and men of every language worshipped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. I, Daniel, was troubled in spirit, and the visions that passed through my mind disturbed me. I approached one of those standing there and asked him the true meaning of all this. So he told me and gave me the interpretation of these things. The 4 great beasts are 4 kingdoms that will rise from the earth, but the saints of the Most High will receive the kingdom and will possess it forever. Yes, forever and ever. Then I wanted to know the true meaning of the 4th beast, which was different from all the others, most terrifying, with its iron teeth and bronze claws, the beast that crushed and devoured its victims and trampled underfoot whatever was left. I wanted to know about the 10 horns on its head and about the other horn that came up before the 3 of them fell, the horn that looked more imposing than the others, and that had eyes and a mouth that spoke boastfully. As I watched, this horn was waging war against the saints and defeating them until the Ancient of Days came and pronounced judgment in favor of the saints of the Most High. And the time came when they possessed the kingdom. He gave me this explanation. The 4th beast is a 4th kingdom that will appear on earth. It will be different from all the other kingdoms and will devour the whole earth, trampling it down and crushing it. The 10 horns are 10 kings who will come from this kingdom. After them another king will arise, different from the earlier ones. He will subdue 3 kings. He will speak against the Most High and oppress his saints, and try to change the set times and the laws. The saints will be handed over to him for a time, times, and a half time. But the court will sit, and his power will be taken away and completely destroyed forever. Then the sovereignty, power, and greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven will be handed over to the saints, the people of the Most High. His kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom, and all rulers will worship and obey him. This is the end of the matter. I, Daniel, was deeply troubled by my thoughts, and my face turned pale, but I kept the matter to myself. That's a great chapter. There's a lot in that chapter. We are in the handout, and we are going to go to page 23 in a moment. Actually, but we'll probably just briefly look at page 20. I think that'll help you. But before we go to page 20, I just also want to point out there was a question last time about, you might remember, the question was, is a certain person the possibility of being the Antichrist? You remember that? So that made me, and I had not heard, somebody asked if Holt, a guy by the name of Holt, who suggested that it was Prince Charles was the Antichrist. And I had heard that idea that Charles was, somebody suggested it. I'd never heard, I didn't remember hearing that it was Holt who said that. I don't know who Holt is. But I had heard that Charles had said, was accused or thought of. So, but I know this. There are a lot of people who have been thought of as the Antichrist. And so what I did was for the sake of, to help you, I thought you might be interested. Here's an article. I literally just Googled who has been accused of being the Antichrist. Who hasn't been? You and me, as far as I know. As far as I know. When I was young, I remember one point, when I was like 18 years old, I remember seeing a poster somewhere. It said, I used to think that everybody in the world is crazy except for you and me. But lately I've been wondering about you. But there's a lot of people who have been accused. And so honestly, you look at this article, and where I fall on all of this is I don't think anybody has a chance of knowing who it's going to be until some things really fall into place. So it's almost like he's accused, he ain't it. They accused him, he ain't it. They accused him, he ain't it. Because when it happens, it's going to happen. So I'm not living in that kind of fear. I did want to just call your attention back to page 20 before we go to 23. And you see the chart. And I just wanted to see the chart because we're not going to go through the chart. But I wanted to just point out, because last time we kind of did, and we just saw how the first beast, the lion, fits with the vision that Nebuchadnezzar has in chapter 2, and it's the head of gold, and it's Babylon. And the second beast is the bear, and it fits with the chest of arms and silver in Nebuchadnezzar's vision, and it's the Medo-Persian Empire. And the third beast is the leopard, and it fits with Nebuchadnezzar's dream, where it's the third part, the belly of thighs and bronze being Greece. And so it just kind of fits that. And I don't want to go through all of that because we did that. But you could go online if you weren't here, and it's also all in the handout, as you know. But today we're going to go to this terrifying and frightening beast that we will end up coming back to this a little bit later in our class. But we're going to go over to page 23 now. So the fourth of the 4 empires is Rome. Or as I say, the first of the 4 winds, because we saw that there are 4 winds, and they're blowing on each of these empires. And the word for winds is ruach. So it's like the 4 spirits, or the Spirit of God is blowing on the kingdoms of men and raising up these kingdoms, and that's the picture. So it raised up Babylon, it raised up the Medo-Persians, it raised up Greece, and then it will raise up this 4th kingdom. And you'll notice in Daniel chapter 7, verse 7, it begins with the words, "After this I saw in the night visions." So it's kind of there to see, but ArtScroll points out that the verse obviously is describing a separate dream, either the next night, it says the next night, but it's just a separate dream. It could be nights later, because it's after this, after that dream, then another dream. So Daniel has he has nights where he's having these dreams. Historically, the next great kingdom after Greece, the third kingdom, is Rome, just history. And this kingdom is so terrifying that it's kind of unlike any of the three kingdoms that came before it, and it's not actually compared to any specific animal, which also makes it distinct. And so the question is it Rome? Well, ArtScroll says three attributes given in this beast correspond to three characteristics possessed by the Romans. So ArtScroll says it's Rome. Okay, so that's a Jewish perspective, which fits very much with the evangelical perspective, that it's Rome. And it says it has great brutality, it has meticulous planning of strategy, and it has overwhelming power. So it's got those are the things that ArtScroll says, and it goes a lot more, and we'll come back to some of that stuff when we get to like verses 23 and 24. But if you want to read a little bit about the rise and the fall of the Roman Empire, you can do that. That's there for you to look at, but we will not do that here. Going over to page 24. This beast has huge iron teeth, breaks in pieces, and tramples with the residue with its feet. Rome ruthlessly destroyed civilizations and cities. It took hundreds of thousands of slaves. In contrast, the Greeks, under Alexander the Great, seldom crushed people. He'd conquer them, and he is known for exporting Greek culture, but not destroying the culture of others. He just would incorporate them. Sort of like Star Trek, the Borg. We're here to assimilate you. You will be assimilated. So I gave you this thing, slaves and free men, and I made it smaller because I thought I didn't want to take up all that paper. And then today I looked at it, I thought I'm going to take up the paper. So I made more copies. So this is the same. So I actually do want to go over this with you because I think it's worth going over. Okay, so slaves and freemen, this is by PBS, just an article from them. And I think it just describes what it's like, slavery in Rome. So slavery in ancient Rome differed from its modern forms in that it was not based on race. In fact, we saw earlier, last year I think it was, that really in the Bible, races are not based on skin color, they're based on language. Skin color was irrelevant. Korean, American, whatever, black, all that was completely irrelevant in those days. What mattered was the language. Okay, that was the issue of race right there. What language do you speak? And so slavery in ancient Rome differed from its modern forms in that it was not based on race, but like modern slavery, it was an abusive and degrading institution, and cruelty was commonplace. Skipping a paragraph. Slaves in Rome might include prisoners of war, sailors captured and sold by pirates, or slaves bought outside the Roman territory. In hard times, it was not uncommon for desperate Roman citizens to raise money by selling their children into slavery. That actually was extremely common, and actually extremely common in the ancient world to sell daughters into sexual slavery. All slaves and their families were the property of the owners, who could sell or rent them out at any time. Their lives were harsh. Slaves were often whipped, branded, or cruelly mistreated. Their owners could also kill them for any reason and would face no punishment. Although Romans accepted slavery as the norm, some people, like the poet and philosopher Seneca, argued that slaves should at least be treated fairly. Slaves worked everywhere, in private households, in mines and factories, and on farms. They also worked for city governments on engineering projects such as roads, aqueducts, and buildings. As a result, they merged easily into the population. In fact, slaves look so similar. In fact, slaves look so similar to Roman citizens that the Senate once considered a plan to make them wear special clothing so that they could be identified at a glance, kind of like a Star of David. The idea was rejected because the Senate feared that if the slaves saw how many of them there were working in Rome, that they might be tempted to join forces and rebel. Manumission. Another difference between Roman slavery and its more modern variety was manumission, the ability of slaves to be freed. Roman owners freed their slaves in considerable numbers. Some freed them outright, while others allowed them to buy their own freedom. The prospect of possible freedom through manumission encouraged most slaves to be obedient and hardworking. Formal manumission was performed by a magistrate and gave freedmen full Roman citizenship. The one exception was that they were not allowed to hold office. However, the law gave any children born to freedmen after formal manumission full rights of citizenship, including the right to hold office. Informal manumission gave fewer rights. Slaves freed informally did not become citizens, and any property or wealth they accumulated reverted to their former owners when they died. Once freed, former slaves could work in the same jobs as plebeians, as craftsmen, midwives, or traders. Some even became wealthy. However, Rome's rigid society attached importance to social status, and even successful freedmen usually found the stigma of slavery hard to overcome. The degradation lasted well beyond the slavery itself. So, I thought you might be interested in that. Going over to page 25, today, according to a September 2022 article, the latest estimates show that there are now 50 million people worldwide in modern slavery. There are actually more people who are slaves today than at any time in history. That's crazy, isn't it? The top 10 countries with the highest prevalence of modern slavery, the United States is number 10. Hard to believe, but we're on the list. The 13th Amendment on the left side there says, to the Constitution said, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as punishment for crime whereof the party shall be duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. I was trying to understand that myself, and I guess what I'm thinking of is people who are in prison and are out, like, working on the sides of the roads and things like that. Fighting fires now? Okay. Yeah. So there's stuff like that. Then there's the issue of human trafficking. There are roughly 50 million enslaved today, according to this article. Just says more. 26% of the 50 million are children. Obviously, we might think about slavery. When we think about slavery, I think we typically want our minds, for our comfort, to think about things like the cartels. And I understand why we would go there. But the truth is, it's a whole lot bigger than that. In politics, we've got people like Jeffrey Epstein. In Hollywood, we have people like Harvey Weinstein. There's a lot of slavery. And especially a lot of sex slavery. Going over to page 26. Slavery is a real concern in the last days. In Revelation 18, Revelation 17 is economic Babylon, or religious Babylon, and Revelation 18 is economic or political Babylon. Revelation 18, the kings of the earth who committed fornication and lived luxuriously with her, the harlot, will weep and lament for her when they see the smoke of her burning, standing at a distance for fear of her torment, saying, alas, alas, that great city Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour your judgment has come. And the merchants of the earth will weep and mourn over her, for no one buys their merchandise anymore. merchandise of gold and silver, precious stones and pearls, fine linen and purple, silk and scarlet, and every kind of citron wood, every kind of object of ivory, every kind of object of the most precious wood, bronze, iron, and marble, and cinnamon and incense, fragrant oil and frankincense, wine and oil, fine flour and wheat, cattle and sheep, horses and chariots, and bodies and souls of men. So political Babylon will be crushed in Revelation 18, just before the Lord returns in Revelation 19. And when that government is brought down, as it's happening, the rest of the world will think, there goes our whole economic system. Imagine if the United States was completely obliterated right now. What would be the impact on the world economy? And that's the picture there. Okay, so this fourth beast has 10 horns. The beast, or the Antichrist of the last days, will have 10 horns. Revelation chapter 13, remember me saying Daniel is the key to understanding Revelation. So we're going to see a lot of connections as we go through chapter 7 and 8, but especially 7, but also 11 for that matter. So Revelation 13, then I stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rising up out of the sea. We talked about out of the sea of the nations. The sea of the nations, the Gentile nations versus the land. So I suggested the possibility that the Antichrist comes out of the sea of the nations and is a Gentile, and I suggested the possibility that the false prophet comes out of, because he comes out of the land, would be a Jew. So we'd have a Gentile and a Jew in this coalition. I think that's a possibility. I wouldn't sell my salvation on that or bet my salvation on it, but I think it's a good possibility. So I saw a beast rising up out of the sea and having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his horns were 10 crowns, and on his heads a blasphemous name. Now the beast which I saw was like a leopard. His feet were like the feet of a bear, and his mouth like the mouth of a lion. That's the first 3 beasts of Daniel chapter 7 right there, in reverse order, because Daniel's looking forward and Revelation's looking backwards. The dragon gave him his power, his throne, and great authority. And I saw one of the heads as if it had been mortally wounded, and his deadly wound was healed. And all the world marveled and followed the beast. So they worshipped the dragon who gave authority to the beast, and they worshipped the beast, saying, who is like the beast, and who's able to make war with him? So this beast, this fourth beast, has 10 horns. Horns are symbols for power in the Bible. For example, Deuteronomy 33 says his horns are like the firstborn bull. His horns are like the horns of a wild ox. Together with him he shall push the peoples to the ends of the earth. So this is a part of the prophetic prophecy that Moses is speaking over Joseph when he blesses the 12 tribes of Israel at the end of his life. And he says Joseph will have horns like the horns of a bull. He will just be powerful. Horns are symbols of power. Or the golden altar of incense in the holy place is basically something sort of like this. A little bit, it's a cubit and a half by a cubit and a half, which is a cubit's 18 inches, so 18 and a half. So it's a little bit more than, this. And it's about this high, and it has a horn on each side. And blood is put on the horn 4 times a year. Horns are symbols of power, so blood's put on the horn. And the blood is sprinkled with a finger 7 times, 7 the number of perfection. So it's like they're saying there's perfect power, the horn, perfect power in the blood. From all 4 directions, no matter which direction you look at it from, no matter how you look at it, there's power in the blood so that our prayers can be heard by the Lord. So horns are symbols of power. Crowns are symbols of kingship or governmental authority. So the last days beast, which is some kind of a revived empire, will have 10 powerful kings. There does not seem to necessarily be a clear correspondence to the 10 horns of the historic Roman Empire. At least I don't see anything in evangelical material that says that. I will say, and I'll bring it out when we come to verses 23 and 24, that Art Scroll in Jewish theology does see something in the historic Rome for these 10 horns. So that is kind of interesting. We'll do that when we get to verses 23 and 24. on page 27. In Daniel 7, then, Daniel dreams of 4 beasts. The first is a lion. It represents Babylon. Babylon is destroyed by the Medes and the Persians. The second beast is a bear. It represents the Medes and the Persians. The Medes and the Persians are conquered by the Greeks. The third beast is a leopard. It represents Greece. Greece is conquered by Rome. The fourth beast is a terrifying and frightening beast with 10 horns. That beast is the beast which is ruling the world when the Ancient of Days, Yeshua, takes his throne to rule the world in Daniel 7, verse 9. But Rome was never conquered. It fell from within. But Daniel chapter 7, especially verse 11, is a picture of the fourth beast being judged or conquered by the Ancient of Days. So this suggests, this is where people get the idea that there must be a revived Roman Empire because it was not conquered by the Ancient of Days. It literally just died. And so, therefore, the thought is it will rise again so that it can be crushed when Yeshua comes back. Daniel chapter 7, verse 11, I watched them because of the sound of the pompous words which the horn was speaking. That is obviously the same person in Revelation chapter 13, verses 5 and 6. And he was given a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies. And he was given authority to continue for 42 months, which is, by the way, exactly 3.5 years. So the phrase time, times and a half time, which we read a little, and we'll see a little later in this chapter, time, times and a half time. Time would be like, say, from 1 year. Times is plural, so 2 years, and a half time would be a half a year, so it'd be 3.5 years. So if you read the book of Revelation and you don't have Daniel, you will think that there are 3.5 years or 42 months, because the book of Revelation will, like for example, here mention 42 months in chapter 13, verse 5. It will also mention time, times, and a half time, and will also mention 1,260 days. Again, exactly 42 months of 30 days apiece. But when you read Daniel, you'll realize, no, it's actually going to be, because of Daniel 9, when we get there, you'll see it's actually going to be 3.5 years followed by 3.5 years. Daniel is the key to understanding Revelation, and you're starting to see that. Okay, so the 10 horns may mean that 10 individual nations will come together to make up the revived Roman Empire, or it could mean that there will be 10 regional governments that will comprise it. That is what Van Impe used to say. Currently, there are 27 countries in the European Union. So that kind of thought probably does not work. It could be, linguistically, or other ways. And it could be also 10 king or emperors within Rome. So there are ways to make it work. So it could. So we can't know exactly how to piece all this together, but we'll look at it more thoroughly when we get a little later in the chapter. But it does seem to describe this process of development, like this kingdom, this fourth kingdom is developing. Okay? If you look at Daniel chapter 7, like for example, in verse 8, while I was considering the horns, there was another horn, a little one, coming up. So it's developing. It is growing. Before whom the first 3 horns were plucked out. So there's this process. So there is this process that's going to go on. It's not like, here it is, but rather it's a process. According to Van Impe, Walvoord, so Van Impe is obviously, you all know who that is. He went to be with the Lord a few years ago. John Walvoord is obviously the most famous eschatology, last days teacher within the Baptist movement. And Luther. And many others, all considered the little horn to be the Antichrist. This person will be a person who has the eyes of a man and speaks boastfully. So on page 28, Daniel 7, 21 through 22, says, as I was watching, the same horn was making war against the saints and prevailing against them until the Ancient of Days came, and judgment was made in favor of the saints of the Most High, and the time came for the saints to possess the kingdom. So the little horn then starts off small. It starts off little, and it grows in size. Sonsino also says that this little horn is Antiochus Epiphanes. So I tend to think that that's what Sonsino is going to say, because, and Jewish theology is going to say it, because they don't want to consider what Jesus said. Because Jesus directly says in Matthew 24, verse 15, I didn't put it in our handout, but he actually said, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, let those who are in Judea flee. So he says in Matthew 24:15, when you see what Daniel said, he's looking at it in the future. Obviously, Antiochus Epiphanes is 165 years before Jesus. So we have another reason to believe there is this resurrected kind of thing. And what happened with Rome and what happened with these kingdoms is all pointing towards what's going to happen. Does that make sense? Okay, so Daniel 7:21 clearly depicts the little horn as a ruler who is overcome at the last day's judgment of God. For example, Revelation 13:5 and 6, and he was given a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and he was given authority to continue for 42 months. And he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and those who dwell in heaven. Daniel 11, then the king shall do according to his own will, and he shall exalt and magnify himself above every god. And he shall speak blasphemies against the God of gods, and shall prosper till wrath has been accomplished, for what has been determined shall be done. He shall regard neither the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any God, for he shall exalt himself above them all. But in their place he shall honor a God of fortresses, that's power, a God which his fathers did not know, and he shall honor with gold and silver, with precious stones and pleasant things, and he shall act against the strongest fortresses with a foreign god, which he shall acknowledge and advance its glory, and he shall cause them to rule over many and divide the land for gain. So evidently, this horn, this last day's horn, is speaking and overcoming the last days by God. So there's got to be some kind of a resurrection. So the first three kingdoms, as it were, the lion and the bear and the leopard, they are turned into, as it were, they become into this fourth beast. They're all conquered by, and this fourth beast has the powers of these first three, but this last one is not crushed by the coming of the Lord. But it looks like what's going to happen is, and it would explain why there's feet in Nebuchadnezzar's dream made of, not the legs are of iron, the fourth beast, but the feet are iron and clay. So there's this resurrected kind of thing in the last days. That's the picture there. So Van Impe said that the revived Roman Empire would grow past 10 nations to 13 and then drop back down to 10. Okay, Van Impe was just brilliant in so many things, but obviously he is wrong on this because the European Union grew to 27 so far that we know of. It could also be that the Antichrist will entirely conquer 3 nations or regions, which will then become one of the 10. This Antichrist, or this beast, this little horn, is going to have the eyes like the eyes of a man. Now, eyes suggest people's desires, like you might say to a kid who's eating chocolate cake, his eyes are bigger than his stomach. All right? So the desires. In 1 John chapter 2, for all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, is not of the Father, but is of the world. And the world is passing away in the lust of it, but he who does the will of God abides forever. When I look at 1 John chapter 2, 16 and 17, I actually think about, I should have put it in your handout, but Genesis 3, verse 6. When Eve saw that the tree was good, there's the lust of the eyes. Okay, the lust of the flesh, rather. It was good for food. It was pleasant to the eyes. There's the lust of the eyes. And it was desirable to make her wise. There's the pride of life. You'll become like God. So you can just see the trick of Satan right there in Genesis 3, verse 6. And you can see that that is what is in the world, the prince of this world, in 1 John chapter 2, verses 16 and 17. And the reason... I do think it's very interesting. That's 1 John 2, 16 and 17. But if you go just one more verse, in verse 18, you will find the first use of the word Antichrist in the scripture. There's that word Antichrist actually. It actually appears 5 times in the Bible, but only 4 verses. Okay, and they're all used by John the apostle. So we have the beast in Revelation, and we have the horn of Daniel, but the actual phrase Antichrist, that word, is a word that is only used by John. And the first place is in 1 John 2:18, which is right after verses 16 and 17. 1 John 2:18, little children, it is the last hour. And as you have heard that the Antichrist, and notice that's a singular word there, singular Antichrist is coming. Even now many Antichrists, plural, have come, by which we know that it is the last hour. When I first did this, and I think I gave a handout out last week, and some of you may still have it, I said there are only 4. There's actually 5, and the reason why there's 5, but in 4 verses, because what I failed to catch was the plural one. One time it's plural. In 1 John 2:18, a singular Antichrist, many Antichrists. There is a particular Antichrist coming, but there are many Antichrists. Okay, so an Antichrist is any person who's standing against Jesus, okay, but denying who he is. But it also really draws, I thought of this because of the question that was asked last week, for example, and I alluded to it already, was Prince Charles, or is he the Antichrist? Well, he doesn't have to be the Antichrist to say he's one of many. He's not the Antichrist. He's just not. I don't believe there's any chance he's the Antichrist. But I think there's a lot of people who are, and if we look at, 666 is the gematria of the name Nero. So Nero is a really good option for John to be thinking of when he thinks about the Antichrist, because his name actually adds up in gematria to 666. And obviously Hitler, right? But neither Nero nor Hitler were ever friends of the Jews. And the Antichrist will be a friend of the Jews. And some of you might wonder, what about Trump? Trump's not from Europe. So I'm just really thankful that Trump is friendly to Israel. Okay, so that's where I'm at. Because he's the most friendly president for Israel that we've had. I don't even know who you compare him to. Truman was very friendly towards Israel, and so was Nixon. Those are the ones who really stand out. Roosevelt, Franklin, FDR was one of the worst for Jews. Well, you had a question? Thought? Well, in Daniel 9, it's going to talk about a treaty with many nations, right? And in the middle of that treaty, he will proclaim himself to be God, and he will desecrate the temple. That's in Daniel 9. We'll look at that. So, obviously, the treaty is going to include Israel, right? So, but in the middle of it, he turns against Israel. So that it strongly says, it seems to me to be more than a suggestion, that he's standing with Israel at the beginning of that 7 years, and in the middle of it, he turns against them. Does that make sense? So, but I don't think there's any way that no, he's not Trump, and he's not Obama. I'm an equal opportunity killer here. Now, if we want to talk about Biden, we can have a whole other discussion. But no, I'm sorry. All right. So, okay. So, and then in 1 John 2:22, who is a liar? But he who denies that Jesus is the Christ, he is Antichrist. By the way, the word Antichrist in Greek, the word is Antichristos. So obviously, Christos is Christ. And so in Greek, if you want to say something is the opposite, you could say like anti, or you could just put the letter A, the in front of it. So if you put just the A in front of it, that's the same as an anti. So in other words, this is a person who's trying to take the place of Christ. And Jesus said, in the last days there will be many who will say, I'm Christ, Matthew 24. And so that's Antichrist. So there'll be many Antichrists, right? But there is going to be one in particular, this little horn. And then in 1 John 4, verse 3, and every spirit that does not confess that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is not of God, and this is the spirit of Antichrist. You will notice, I did put it in here just so you would know, it actually says in 1 John 2:18, you have heard that the Antichrist, and the word the is on there. It's actually in there, so it's not a Antichrist. There's a difference. In English, you understand an indefinite article versus a definite article. A table, the table. A Antichrist, the Antichrist. So in 1 John 2, verse 18, the first time the word Antichrist appears, it is the Antichrist, not a Antichrist. There is a particular one. And then there'll be many Antichrists. There is no definite article in front of that when it says many Antichrists. So there's not a particular, it's like there's a lot of them. And then if you go to 1 John 2:22, again, now the reason why the word the will look different in 1 John 2:18 than it looks in 1 John 2:22, it's a grammar thing, but the word the is there. It's sort of a difference between, like, the word the is spelled different if it's the subject, if it's the direct object, if it's an indirect object. And Greek is so specific. Nothing like Hebrew and nothing like English. Really specific. So you don't have to wonder if it's an indirect object or a direct object. It will actually have a different spelling of the word the. All right, so there is the Antichrist the first time the word appears in verse 18, the Antichrist the first time it appears, or in verse 22, and the Antichrist in 1 John 4, verse 3. And then over on page 29 in 2 John, verse 7, for many deceivers have gone out of the world who do not confess Jesus Christ as coming in the flesh. This is a deceiver and an Antichrist, but it's actually the Antichrist. Okay, so it's specific. Like you're an Antichrist if you're denying that Jesus came in the flesh. You know, the Islamic statement: there's only one God and He has no son. That's what's on the Dome of the Rock. Well, that's completely demonic. Like, that is as satanic as anything in creation, right there. It just is. Okay, so this beast has eyes like the eyes of a man, and then on page 29, he has a mouth that speaks pompous words. Eyes might suggest people's desires, but the mouth represents the heart. Okay, Matthew 12, verse 34, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. So the Antichrist is going to be a person who's going to have fleshly desires of a man and the heart or pride of Satan himself. And this is a really good place for us to break. And next time, we will begin looking at God the Father, the Ancient of Days, and we're actually going to spend a good deal of time looking at fire in the Bible, because fire is a major emphasis in the next section of Daniel. And then after we're done with that, the next thing we'll look at, it's one of my favorite things in the book of Daniel, is the whole topic of the Son of Man, because that's a big deal in Daniel. And so that's coming also. And it's a big deal to Jesus. He claimed that's his favorite self-titled description for himself. I'll give you a little teaser on that. The phrase Son of Man, according to Jewish theology, does not imply humanity. In Jewish theology, it implies divinity. So the 84 times that Jesus claims to be the Son of Man, 84 times he is saying, I'm divine, I'm God. And like when I got credentialed on my credentialing exam, there was a question. And basically, the question went here. The phrase Son of God, they wanted you to say that refers to divinity. The phrase Son of Man, that refers to the idea of humanity. That is actually 180 degrees wrong in Jewish theology. So Daniel Boyarin wrote a book called The Jewish Gospels, and he makes the point. He's a Jewish man. He's an Orthodox Jewish Talmudic scholar, and he's not a believer in Jesus. And he makes the point that the reason they wanted to kill Jesus was because he declared himself to be the Son of Man, and they understood that what he was saying is, I'm God. And he kept saying it, and that was the reason. So the idea that he never declared himself to be God is downright wrong. He kept saying it over and over and over again. I actually am the divine one. Right? And we'll look at that. It's like one of my favorite things in the book of Daniel.